This video is for you if you work with type often in your designs and you wish to do things faster and more efficiently. This is the second part of a mini-series, adding an additional 15 keyboard shortcuts and techniques to the original 20 that I shared with you last time. The ones I'm going to show you now are slightly more advanced and complex, but probably even more useful than the previous set. We are back in InDesign for the second part of this tutorial, and this time we will also use a bit of Photoshop because there's a couple of specific shortcuts that you can only present there. And without any further delay, let's get started with a very useful shortcut, and that's for changing the leading in our text. So if I select a paragraph, let's just say this one here, I can use this shortcut very quickly. It's Option, up and down arrow to change the leading, and this is changing with the same increment as the size change, which was in the previous part. So these are all in the preferences under units and increments, so you can find the option here. So Alt up and down arrow by default changes the leading or the space between your lines by 2 points. But if you want to increase the speed at which you change the leading, you can hold down the Command key, and so together Command and Option up and down arrow will change the leading with 10-point increments. There is also a shortcut for resetting the leading, which I find very useful. Now, whenever I say resetting, it means turning it back to the automatic setting. So anytime you use text, there will be always an auto leading option, and you can find here on the right side in the properties panel as well. So that's the auto option. This is always based on the size of your characters, but the shortcut is Command Option Shift A. It's a bit complicated shortcut, but I recommend to get used to it because it can save you a lot of time. Now, similarly to leading, we have a shortcut for kerning or tracking. Now, we call it kerning when it's applied to, let's say, a single word. So in this case, for example, if I use the Option, left and right arrows, I can do the kerning between A and V. For example, we can get a little bit narrower space between R and A, we can just give a little bit more space, and N and G can get closer as well. Something like that visually looks a bit more balanced. So this is what we call kerning. But if you are using the same shortcut and you apply it on a whole paragraph like this, and you use Option, left and right arrow, this is what we normally would call tracking. This can be a very useful technique and shortcut to make more space. So if you need to squeeze in more text into a text frame, you can always reduce the tracking. Just try to avoid squeezing it too far because it will be hard to read. So you don't want to ruin the legibility of your text. And similarly to leading, this is also something you can track here in the properties panel or in the control bar. So this is the value for tracking. And if you see anything but 0, that means that you changed it. So it's a custom value. If you want to set it back to the default values, just set it to 0. Just the way we've done it with leading, kerning or tracking can also be sped up by holding down the Command key together with the Option key. So Command, Option, left and right arrows will be 5 times faster kerning or tracking. And because kerning and tracking is so important, there's even a shortcut for adjusting specifically the spacing between words. So without changing the distance between the characters inside a word, you can just specifically adjust the spaces. And this is by holding down the Option key and Command // to increase the spaces. So you can see when I'm doing this, the spaces only increase between the words, but not inside the words. And if I use the same modifiers, Command Option, but with backspace, then I can reduce the spacing between the words. So this is kerning or tracking specifically for the spaces between words in your selected text. This is definitely one of the less known shortcuts, but it is an extremely useful one. So highly recommend to keep it in mind and practice using it so you will remember it. Now there's another shortcut which is almost like leading, but it can be used on specific words or characters, and it's called baseline shift. So I can show you on a selected word, let's say this one here, and all you have to do is to hold down Option Shift and then use up and down arrows. So basically what's happening is on the selected text, you can shift the baseline. Remember, once again, in the preferences under units and increments, this actually has its own value that you can specify. So if you want to be a bit more subtle with this, you can set the increment to 1 point or even half a point, and that way it will be slower when you are adjusting it. You won't see baseline shift value here in the properties panel by default. You have to click on these more options to be able to see it. So this is the baseline shift. And again, it can be set back to 0 quickly and easily. Hyphenation is another shortcut that I use very often, and this can only be applied to a full paragraph. So even if you have a single word selected, it will be applied to your currently selected paragraph. And this is Command Option Shift H. Now you will see that we get a few hyphens here in the paragraph, and with the same shortcut I can also get rid of them. So hyphenation on and hyphenation off. These are the things that obviously are best to be saved into a style, a paragraph style. Like here in the style that I use for paragraphs, I would specify that I don't want to use hyphens. If you are working in normal view, so pressing W, you can switch between normal and print views. So when you are in the normal view, you can use another shortcut. It's Command Option I to show the hidden characters. This can be very useful to spot end of paragraphs or special characters or like anchored details, but it can also get in the way when you don't need it. So that's why it's worth remembering the shortcut to hide them and show them again. Now, since you are learning Adobe applications, one shortcut you must know about, and that is the spacebar, which is the same in all the Adobe applications. It's for panning. So whenever you hold down the spacebar, you can click and drag and then pan around. Now, what happens if you have text selected and hold down the spacebar? Well, it's going to get rid of the text and it replaces it with a space character. So if you want to avoid that, even while having text selected or while typing, you can still do panning. The only thing you have to do is to instead use the Option key. So holding down the Option key while editing text, you can still do panning, which is brilliant. So this is a shortcut definitely worth remembering. Now here's a few shortcuts specifically when you work with text frames in InDesign. One of them is how you define the selected colors. And for this, I'm just going to open quickly the control panel as well. So control bar, which we can see here on the top. So by default, when I select a text frame, you will see that the colors here are both empty. And that is because the frame colors are visible there. The fill color of the frame and the stroke color of the frame. So just so we can see what's happening, if I apply a blue stroke color, we can see that's going to appear around the frame. But what if I want to quickly change the color of all the copy within this text frame? For that, there is a very useful shortcut. It's simply pressing J on the keyboard can switch to showing the colors of the text inside the frame. Believe me, this is a huge time saver. This is something you will be doing all the time in InDesign. So you would have to switch between selecting the frame attributes or selecting the text inside the frame. So J is switching between the frame attributes and then the text attributes. So there's actually 4 swatches normally when you work in InDesign, 2 for the frame and 2 for the text. So both of them will have a fill and stroke. The one that you will be using the least is the stroke around the text, but the J shortcut to switch between these is extremely useful. Now, if you learn to use these, it's also worth mentioning that here in the toolbar, you see always whether the stroke or the fill color is currently selected. And these are also something that you can switch by pressing X on the keyboard. So whichever comes on top is the one that's going to be selected. So now the stroke is selected, now the fill is selected. And if I press J, I can see now the fill color of the text is selected. Now the stroke color of the text is selected again just by pressing X. So X and J, very, very useful options. And for the frame colors, there's an additional shortcut. It's Shift X to swap the 2 attributes. So the fill color becomes the stroke color and vice versa. So with Shift X, I can do this switch very quickly and easily. And one last shortcut for changing colors, and that is the question mark or / with which you can set the currently selected color to none. So it's basically removing the stroke color in this case when I press it. Maybe one last shortcut here is D to quickly set the default colors, which would be black, stroke, and no fill. And since we added stroke around the text frame, I would like to also point out that whenever you do this, you probably want to go into the text frame options. So it's from Object Text Frame Options or Command B, another useful shortcut. And there you can choose the inset spacing to increase the distance between the text and the outline of your text frame. So whenever you use strokes, this is obviously a much better way of formatting your text frame. In the previous part, we talked about the story editor, which is a great feature within InDesign to make it easier to work with text in general, and that's the story editor. Now, you might recall the shortcut for that was Command Y. So with this, whichever frame you have selected, you get a separate little text editor window, and there you can make changes to your text. And one thing that is different between the story editor and the normal layout view is that here by default, you can select text, let's say this sentence here, and drag and drop it anywhere else within the text. So if I need to move this further down, you can see I could simply drag and drop it. If I press Command Y, I can switch back and I can see now the text is updated. So the third paragraph is now bigger because we just moved a sentence in there. But this is something you can only do in the story editor by default. However, you can actually find a setting to change that and enable it in the layout view as well, if you like drag and dropping text. So all you have to do is to go to preferences. By the way, I'm just using the Command K shortcut every time I go to the preferences. And the feature for this is under type. And there you have the drag and drop text editing feature. If you enable it in the layout view, then you will be able to select text, let's say this one here, and I can now drop it and put it above the other bullet point or any word. For example, I select this one and I can just drop it elsewhere. The reason why it is not enabled by default, because sometimes you can accidentally move things around. So it's up to you whether you like it or not. I normally prefer to keep it off. And if I want to do drag and drop editing, I just go into the story editor. So it can be a little bit more intentional there than having it on all the time in layout view. Now, if you're like me and you work with paragraph styles all the time, then you can also assign shortcuts to them to make it easier and faster to apply them. So for example, here I have two styles, one for the title and one for the heading, but I can switch between these easily by either using the paragraph styles panel. So I can there click on heading, click back on title and do the same thing here as well. Obviously there it's just not enough space for it to show it. But the other more efficient way is to set up shortcuts for these styles. So the way you do that is by right-clicking on a style definition here in the panel and choose Edit. And then you will find the shortcut option here in this dialog box. Now there is a restriction on what keys you can use. You have to hold down the Option key and then one of the numbers from the numeric keypad. So this will only work if you have a bigger keyboard. So on the smaller keyboards, unfortunately, it's a bit more tricky to access these keys. But so the numeric keyboard area, let's say number 1, num1, the way it's referred to that character. So option number 1, I'm going to click OK. And then for the title, I'm going to right click, edit, and I can use again option 0. So let's say OK. Now, if I select this one with option 1 and option 0, I can very quickly switch back and forth between these two styles. How cool is that? And of course, you can assign shortcuts to everything and you can even keep track of them here in the paragraph styles panel. So you will see the shortcuts assigned and normally you wouldn't have more than, let's say, 10 paragraph styles in the document. So that can be easily covered with shortcuts if you want to. But if you don't want to spend time in setting up the style shortcuts, you can also use another brilliant feature in InDesign. It's called Quick Apply. So let's just say I'm going to again select this text here. I press Command Return, which brings up the Quick Apply dialog box. And here I can just type in heading. And you see, after typing the first few characters, it already shows me the style and I just have to press return again. So once again, Command Return, I can type in, let's say title, back to title, and I actually have two styles called the same, but I'm going to use the one that I had here originally. Quick Apply, by the way, can be used for all kinds of things in InDesign. This is just one of many uses, but you can actually find all the features hidden away somewhere in InDesign. As long as you know their name, you can type it into Quick Apply and it will appear straight away without you looking for it in the menus. So a good example for that would be maybe the current page number marker, which is really hidden away under the type menu, insert special character markers, current page number. There you go. Instead of looking for it, I could just say Command Enter and type in current, and you can already see it tells me exactly where it is. So if I increase the size of this window, I can see where I can find it, or I can just simply press Enter and it will add the current page number marker in there for me. Now there's also another fairly advanced keyboard shortcut method for quickly changing or updating words in your document. So this is like a find and replace, but without leaving the selected text and without going into any dialog box. Of course, we can use Command F, which is the shortcut to get to the find change dialog box, but without going in there, you can actually achieve simple changes quickly by doing the following 3 steps. So this is probably the most complicated one to remember, but I use it quite often, so I'm going to show it to you. So let's say I want to change the word trip to journey. And you can see we have a few instances of that word within this story here on the left. So what I need to do first is to mark the word I want to replace. So once I have selected trip, I can press Shift F1. So for this, if you want to use the function keys, you also have to make sure that they act as normal function keys. On Mac, that's something you need to do in the system preferences. You just need to go to keyboard, and here you have to make sure you enable this feature. So use function keys as standard function keys. Once you have that, just press Shift F1, which will mark the word or jump to the next instance. You can actually use this Shift F1 to go through and see how many times you have that word appearing in your currently selected text frame. The second step is to mark the word that you want to use for replacing it. So let's say I'm going to type in here somewhere journey, and I double click on it, and I'm going to use Command F2. Command F2. So that's the word that I'm going to use to replace the word trip. And now I just have to press Shift F3 a couple of times to replace all the words, but I can actually see the changes one by one on my screen. So when I press Shift F3, the first one is going to be highlighted, then replaced. And then if I keep pressing these shortcuts, it's going to keep replacing it, as you can see. And then at the end, it just says the search is completed, which means all of the instances of the word trip are now replaced to journey. So as I said, it's a little bit of a difficult shortcut to remember, but if you practice it and do it a couple of times, you will remember it and it will save you a lot of time. If you need to specify more than just simply replacing words, remember to use the Find Change dialog box, which was once again Command F. And to wrap up this video, I have 2 more bonus shortcuts in Photoshop, so I'm just going to switch there quickly. And by the way, this artwork was created for our podcast. If you haven't listened to it already, you can find it on our website, so just go to yesimadesigner.com, and on the top you will find a section for podcast. You can listen to it on our site, there is an embedded player there, or you can also find us on Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon as well. So to move back to the shortcuts I wanted to mention, first one is when you have text selected in Photoshop and you want to start a new text layer, all you have to do is to hold down the Shift key and click somewhere else. So you see that starts to create a new text layer. And with a recent update in Photoshop, whenever you do this, it will also automatically add 2 words lorem ipsum into your text layer, so it doesn't start completely blank. But this is a really cool feature, and if you want to accept typing, you just have to press Escape. The first time you do this, Photoshop is going to ask you whether you want to use it to cancel or commit to the changes. I like to use the Escape for committing changes, so I recommend to set it that way. And finally, another technique, if you want to create a paragraph to a certain size, you can use the Option key with the Type tool, click once and type the values in here. So you can, let's say, type in 200 by 200, and there you go, it creates a frame exactly to that size. Let us know in the comment section what would you like us to cover next time on this series. Click on the link in the description or the join button to become a member if you want to work on future projects with us and see the whole design or illustration process live. Thanks a lot for watching, like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Have fun learning, guys, and I will see you in the next one.